Meeting of the Speech Language Pathology and Audiology and Hearing Aid Dispensers Board. Excuse me. It is April 27th at approximately 1 o'clock. I was wondering if I could ask Charisse to call the board member roll.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye, they're here.
Ms. Kaiser? Mr. Borges?
Here.
Ms. Chang? Ms. Dominguez?
Here.
Dr. Valdez? Dr. White?
Here.
Ms. Chang?
Here.
Let me just check the attendees real quick to see if Dr. Valdez is potentially in there. No. Okay. Well, we can still proceed. We do have a quorum.
Okay, we do have 5. Okay, thank you. Great. So item number 2 is public comment for items not on the agenda. So I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
All right, this is a moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment for items not on the agenda, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 3, review and possible approval of the February 24th, 2023 board meeting minutes. I believe Maria is going to start us off with that.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. The minutes includes the board meeting with updates of board activities, including business modernization project and legislation. At this meeting, the board revised the board's administrative procedure manual, modified proposed regulations regarding SLIPA supervision, and responded to public comments on proposed regulations regarding SLIPA program academic. Also included are the minutes for the Audiology Practice Committee, as well as the Hearing Aid Dispensers Practice Committee.
Okay, does anyone have any comments about the minutes? Seeing none, I have one question myself. If we looked on page 2 of 15, at the top, second paragraph down, it says, Dr. Raggio asked if there is a definition of immediate supervision in attachment B. Charisse Burns replied that it was in section 1399, 154.1.1c. So I was looking in the Practice Act book and I can't find that. It's probably me, but is there someone who can point out where that is?
It's regarding to the attachments that were in the that was included for the discussion. So there was proposed regulations as part of the discussion, and so I believe it was adding a section, that section.
Okay,
but there is no current language.
Okay,
there's a misnumbering as well. Because there's only a 1399.154.1, not an extra 0.1. I think that's a typo.
Oh. Okay, so can we correct that? Okay, so that's new language that's going to be added. Is that correct, Maria?
Yes, it was in reference to new language that's being added. So currently that does not exist. That's why I believe I put that clarification of the attachment so that the public doesn't get confused that it's the current regulations.
Okay. Are there any other discussion items regarding the minutes? Okay, hearing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
I move to accept the minutes.
Amy White will second.
Great, thank you. If I could ask the moderator to open for public comment regarding the minutes.
This meeting is being recorded.
Is there any other board discussion about the minutes? Seeing none, I would like to call the vote if you would, Charisse.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio,
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser,
Aye.
Mr. Borges,
Aye.
Ms. Chang,
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez, Dr. Valdez, Dr. White.
Aye. Aye. Sorry.
No worries. Motion carried.
All right, moving on to item number 4, DCA update, DCA board and bureaus relationship. I'm hoping that Yvonne Durantes is the Assistant Deputy Director of DCA Boards and Bureau Relations, and she is hopefully with us today. I think I see her name there. Welcome, Yvonne.
Hi there. Are you able to hear me all right?
Yes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. My name is Yvonne Durantes, and I'm happy to be here today to provide you an update on the Department of Consumer Affairs. I will go ahead and get started with the diversity, equity, and inclusion update. And so as some of you may know, last fall, the department did establish a diversity equity steering committee, which is comprised of 12 executive leaders from boards, bureaus, and the department, and has been working on many items, including updating the strategic planning process, training and development of informational DEI fact sheet, which was distributed to board leadership. I'm pleased to report on the progress of the committee's efforts up to date. And if anyone does have any questions, I am happy to provide any additional resources or information offline as well. And so the strategic planning process has been updated to embed DEI into the process, and it includes a survey, a DEI section in the environmental scan, video messages, and a brief training video. And so this month, DCA's team will be reaching out to your executive officer to develop or update your new strategic plans. And so in addition to that, all DCA solid trainers will also be completing a 50-hour diversity, equity, and inclusion training certification program through the University of Massachusetts. And so the training will expand the availability of courses offered to all DCA employees, and employees will be able to access and can already access and register for 3 DEI courses that will be available in June, so just in a couple months. And so DCA's first diversity, equity, and inclusion fact sheet has been released. It was developed as an informational tool, which includes the department's 3 DEI initiatives. It also memorializes DCA services that support DEI efforts, and also includes DEI terminology as it applies to DCA. And so the DEI steering committee will continue to work on other items that help support our efforts, and I look forward to updating you on continued progress in some of the upcoming months. And so stay tuned. Moving on to information on board member trainings. And so just as a reminder, we do have 2 DCA-wide mandatory trainings for the year of 2023, and this includes sexual harassment prevention and security information awareness. And so all DCA employees and appointees, including board and advisory council members, will need to complete the sexual harassment prevention training this year. Board members must take the 2-hour supervisory training. And this training is required every odd-numbered year. It's self-paced, and it's approximately 2 hours. And so any board member assigned with the DCA email is also required to complete the information security awareness fundamentals training. And so this training addresses everyone's role in protecting DCA data and information. And so this training is also available online, and it is required every year. So if you did complete it in 2022, it is required again this year, and it must be completed by the end of 2023. Both the sexual harassment prevention training and the information security awareness trainings, they're both available at the department's learning management system, which is commonly referred to as LMS. And I am happy to help anyone who needs any assistance with login credentials or any troubleshooting. So please feel free to email me directly or email memberrelations@dca.ca.gov, and we will be happy to assist you. Additionally, for more information, we do also have a mandatory trainings page that has been created to help members identify, access, and track specified trainings. And so the page includes direct links to mandatory trainings, as well as other pertinent information and policies specific to other training courses. This web page is located at dca.ca.gov, and you simply need to click on the DCA Board Member Resources Center page. It's located under the Required Board Member Training tab. And again, if you do have any issues locating any of these trainings, please feel free to email me. And so I did just also want to take a moment to thank all of you and thank your executive officer and assistant executive officer for all of your work this year in helping us complete Form 700. And so thank you for everyone who filled them out and who helped us achieve compliance. Moving on, in June 20th, we will be hosting the board member orientation training. It is the second one of the year, and it is required for all board members within 1 year of appointment or reappointment. And the June training will be offered in person here in Sacramento at our headquarters 2 Emerald Training Room. It will be held again on October 10th, 2023. And so I want to make sure that you are all aware of this training, and if you have received the invitation directly from Board and Bureau Relations, that does mean that you need to complete it within the next year. And so feel free to reach out in case there are any questions, any troubleshooting. And again, this training is available for registration via LMS. Next, I want to touch on virtual meetings and the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. And so, as some of you may be aware, legislation did pass last year, which amended provisions of Bagley-Keene. to extend the ability of state bodies such as DCA's boards and bureaus to conduct public meetings virtually through July 1st of 2023. However, absent of a new legislation passing, again, to extend these provisions, DCA's boards and bureaus will not be allowed to conduct meetings virtually after July 1st of this year. And so currently, DCA is aware of legislation that was recently introduced, which is SB 544 by Senator Laird. It does remove certain teleconference requirements from the Open Meeting Act. However, this bill does not include an urgency clause, and this means that it would not take effect until January 1st of 2024. And so therefore, boards and bureaus should prepare to conduct public meetings in person in the meantime, beginning July 1st of this year. Moving on, I want to touch as well on our federal portability law. And so also, as some of you may be aware, on January 5th of this year, a new federal law took effect, which enables service members and their spouses who hold professional licenses in a different state to be able to practice in California within the same professional discipline. And so this is at a similar scope of practice. And if they are required to relocate to California due to military orders, again, they are able to practice under their professional license. And so agency and DCA are currently collaborating on how to best implement this new law. And so DCA will share information as it becomes available. But in the meantime, should your board receive any questions from any service members or their spouses regarding this new law, please do contact our DCA Legal Affairs Unit, and they will be happy to assist. And lastly, I do just want to mention that DCA did submit its 2021-2022 annual report to the legislature, and the report is available on the DCA webpage. And so this annual report includes a new design and additional reporting metrics, such as the military licensing data, which is now required for all DCA boards and bureaus. And so we hope that you will take time to review this impressive report of all the valuable work of all the boards and bureaus. And so I am happy to provide the link for that as well. But other than that, that is the DCA update for this month. Thank you again for the opportunity for me to provide this update, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thank you for that very thorough report. I would like to open it up for the board members to ask any questions. I do see that Todd's hand is up.
Yes, I was just knowing me, I'm going to have trouble finding that stuff. So I could get your email address. So in case I need help finding that training, that would be great.
Yes, of course. It's Yvonne, YVONNE, .Dorantes, and that's D as in dog, ORANTES at dca.ca.gov.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Is there any more board discussion regarding Mr. Rante's report? Seeing none, I'd like to ask the moderator to open for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 5, the board chair's report. I would like to draw your attention to the 2023 board meeting calendar. We only have a couple more meetings this year, but you can see that our next meeting, August 24th and 25th, will be by teleconference, just as today is. But we're planning on making the November meeting, November 30th, December 1st, to be in person. For fiscal reasons, we're feeling that holding it in Sacramento is probably the best option for us. So at this point, that's what the thinking is. I would like to ask Karen Chang, if I could, to update us on the legislative ad hoc committee meeting that was held this morning.
Yeah, I think I will be discussing future meetings, but Cherise will be taking the helm of this one for today.
Okay.
But we did discuss everything, but Cherise is going to go over it.
That's fine. Cherise.
Okay. And just a quick overview of what was went on is we did an overview of the legislative process and positions that the board takes. We reviewed the legislative calendar and the deadlines that are associated with it and how that impacts the board's decision making. And then we also reviewed the bills that are in section 8, agenda item 8 for the board. And during the discussion of that agenda item, I will provide the committee's recommended positions for the bills that have active recommendations.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody is aware of the committees on which they sit, but you might want to take a look at the standing committee pages just to make sure you know which committees you're serving on. Those are on page 2 and 3 of 3. Is there any other board discussion about the chair's report? Seeing none, can I ask the moderator to open for public comment on the chair's report?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close the Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, I believe we, moving on to agenda item 6, I believe we got this report via email last night. Hopefully you got that, but it's the executive officer's report, which is going to talk about a number of things, as you can see. So I'd like to ask Paul to present this report.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sanchez here, the Executive Officer of the Board. I'm going to start with the, my report was just sent to you as a hand carry, so you would have received it in your email, but I'll go ahead and start with my administrative update. And the one thing I want to point out is some changes that we've had in personnel. I'll be talking more about our budget, but I just want to address this part of the report, and that is that we recently had to reduce our staffing to address our potential budget deficit this year. We were able to avoid that by taking measures, including our personnel. So we had a couple of staff that were hired on a more temporary basis. One of them was a limited term appointment that we recently hired, and the other one was our part-time legislation analyst. So the limited term enforcement analyst position was reduced and ended, and the part-time legislative analyst position was just temporarily reduced. I'll go back and talk more about our budget, but I want to just address some of the outreach that we have been able to do this year. Just recently, on April 1st, Gilda Dominguez and I presented to the attendees of the CASHA, California Speech Language Hearing Association Convergence Conference. This is a well-attended conference. This one took place in Anaheim, California. In previous years, I presented with Holly Kaiser or Patty Solomon Rice. This year, I had the opportunity to present with Gilda. I want to say, first of all, that Gilda did a great job. She actually presented some areas, even including discipline, and gave a really good overview from the perspective of a board member of the board. We talked about the importance of licensure, in addition to that enforcement overview, and the board's role in legislation and regulations. This particular audience has had a great interest in our legislative and regulatory process and has wanted to know more about that in the past. So we were able to discuss that specifically with the regulations that affect them, because we have some pending regulations that impact them in their everyday jobs. After the presentation, I was able to participate in a podcast with some of their CASHA representatives. This was also, a really good discussion from some very engaged licensees. And not only did we talk about outreach, but they wanted to know more about how, newer licensees can involve themselves in the regulatory and legislative processes, especially in those areas where we kind of meet at consumer protection. So I thought the discussion went pretty well, and I'll look forward to hearing it myself and be happy to share any of this information with the board. Recently, also on April 4th, we participated in a meeting with what we call CalCAPSID, California Council of Academic Programs in Communication Sciences and Disorders. And this is a quarterly meeting that we attend to discuss online licensing timeframes, and just answer general questions related to licensing. Not included in my report was a meeting that Charisse and I just held with clinic directors on the RPE application process and some of the issues that they're currently experiencing. So we're trying to head off a lot of problems we may be having just with the transition over to our online licensing. We have done a couple of demos already. I expect that we will probably do some more demos. I've been advertising that we can do this. So I know that I'm having to pull Charisse away from things, but she does a really good job with the demos. And I would really like the students that are in the programs that we'll be applying soon to kind of get an overview of this and see what the licensing process looks like today. And then those instructors can also help us in spreading the word. Moving on to our budget report. We've included in that email attachments that include what we usually see as our budget report and our fund condition. The expenditure projection report is reflected of activities through month 7, which would be January 31st, 2023, and is based on that data that's provided to us through our budget office. Based on the current projections, of course, we're on course to expend most of our budget. This year, we saw an increase in operating costs that included personnel and enforcement. This year, they impacted us more than in previous years. We have been doing a great amount of work in different areas this year. So there was definitely an acceleration of work, and that work, in addition to our personnel costs, increased our overall cost. And we were at a point where we had to make some cutbacks to prevent that year-end fiscal deficit. So we worked on temporary spending reductions that included the reduced staffing levels that I discussed earlier. We had to postpone a practical examination, and we had to lower overall spending, in some cases reducing travel and making the board meeting remote as opposed to making it live. So right now, it looks like we're gonna be okay as far as getting to the end of the year, but we're gonna continue to closely monitor our budget, and we'll have more information as we get towards those final projections and that final month. At the end of the budget year, we have a reconciliation month, which we call month 13, and that's when we will truly know all of the cost that were expended this year. In addition, we've included, and we always try to include a fund condition in your materials. And as I mentioned before, this fund condition is a snapshot. It shows you the beginning balance of a fiscal year. It also has projected future years, budget year +1, budget year +2. It also displays the revenues that are coming in and the expenditures, the money that is going out. This report is always going to assume that we are expending all of our budget. This year is one year where we are expending all of our budget. Usually we don't. So when we don't expend our budget, that money reverts to the fund balance, which is this bottom line. And then we have a way of measuring that reserve by months in reserve. So this is the assumption that this is how many months we could operate if we didn't have any more money in our budget. And this is a tool that we use to kind of see the condition of our fund. Moving on to other sections in our report, we also have our regulations, just a snapshot of our regulations. We'll be talking more about regulations later on in the meeting. Section E of my report, our licensing report. I do want to mention that there is an increase in our cycle times that we're experiencing. We've expected this to happen because most of our staff are working on the licensing project. So we're continuing to process applications, but we're also continuing to develop and build the system. And when you're building the system, it also involves troubleshooting and sometimes unexpected work. So I guess to put it simply, we expected the unexpected and we prepared for that. So I want the board to be aware that we have absorbed this workload and we are still working on our current workload, working on some of the backlogs, some of the paper applications that we still have to get through. Our goal is to get through most of this existing backlog within the next 8 weeks. But you can see in our report what the cycle times are. They have increased significantly. We're still at about, I think today at about 13 weeks out. So that's about 3 months out, but we expect to see some changes. As we have talked to stakeholders, we've explained to them that we expect that there's going to be some exponential decreases in these timeframes because as we are tearing away at the backlog, we're also improving our system. There's some things that are working extremely well, and there's some areas that I think are still a bit of a challenge for us that we're working through. I've listed all of the times, and we also post these times on our website so that applicants can see what is expected if they apply today. How long is it going to take for them to get their application? The next section is our practical exam report, and the next examination is going to be held in July. You can see there that we have the exam results for the examination that was held in January, and approximately 41 people took the exam in January. I've also included in your materials a licensing report and our enforcement report. And our enforcement report shows the number of complaints that we've received to date. You can see that there is probably a slight increase in the number of actually, it's roughly about the same, but we're starting to see the enforcement workload kind of kick up a little bit. And in your report, I've also included the disciplinary actions that we have taken for the last 12 months. I don't have anything else to report at this time. Are there any questions or comments from the board? for me. Yes, Todd.
What, just out of curiosity, what has the reason that we are spending pretty much the entire budget this year where normally we wouldn't? Was it the additional staff or was our budget cut?
Our budget wasn't cut, but I do think that the budget does reflect some cuts that took place earlier. We had to make some cuts. What was that, Sharice, 2 years ago?
Yeah, about 2 years ago, we had to take a 5% reduction. I think it was 2 years ago.
Okay.
That 5% reduction was in areas that we weren't always fully expending at that time, but oftentimes the personnel for our board is the biggest chunk of the budget. So part of that was helping balance out the personnel costs. There also was quite a few different increases in personnel and retirement costs, and our budget's based on estimations, and so I think there's kind of just a convergence of events this year that made it difficult.
On the other side of those personnel costs sometimes are unanticipated because we don't always know what those costs are going to be. And there's some other real, I think, detailed ways in which personnel costs are assumed and budgeted for that sometimes, don't work their averages. In our case, we have not had a high attrition rate in staff. So we've kept our staff, and that means that when you keep staff longer, you're generally paying higher salaries as opposed to newer staff, even in the same category. So some classifications have very broad ranges, and that's more of a generalist analyst category, and that's the majority of what we have staff for in our office. Hope that answered your question, Todd.
The downside to being such a good boss, no one will leave you.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other board discussion on the executive officer's report? Seeing none, can I ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. And it does look like we have a request for comment from Marit Wilson Walker. And Ms. Walker, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Of any changes, tweaks, budgetary considerations, and all that's being done. I just want to say thank you to decrease that processing time. Paul, I appreciate what you said and all the efforts being done. And I just want to comment that a 13-week processing time is problematic. I'm an SLP. I work for an NPA, and just out in the field, seeing the result of that delay. It's often, we don't have enough SLPs in the field, and seeing new clinicians who are in a vulnerable position financially, often having just paid for licensure, having paid for ASHA dues, having taken the Praxis. This is them waiting to get a new job, waiting to be able to start a job. It's consumers waiting for services, and not to mention the loss of tax revenue during that time period. So I just wanted to say thanks for all you're doing, and I hope more can be done as time goes by. Thank you.
Thank you, Merritt. And it was also a pleasure talking with you at the conference recently. I do want to comment on this because I wholeheartedly agree with you that it's always a problem when licensing cycle times are delayed. And that's been a great deal of my work here at the board, is trying to ensure that we reduce those times through different strategies, including staffing, process improvements. And the one giant that we were facing was manual processes, because no matter what we did, we were always up against the same problem of just too much paperwork. Unfortunately, our staffing hasn't been able to keep up with the growth of our licensees. So one thing that we really worked towards a few years back was we've got to get this system online. We've got to use technology, leverage that technology to help us do our jobs better and quicker, more efficiently and faster. So I thank you for the comment, and I know the board shares those concerns, and we're going to continue working hard towards this online licensing, because that's gonna help us a great deal, and hopefully next year at this time we won't be talking about this. So thanks again.
All right, this is the moderator. Appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 7, update on the completion of the board's business modernization project and releases of online applications for licensure. And I think Paul and Sharice are going to talk to us about that.
Yes, and what a great segue into our next topic here. Just wanted to give you a business modernization project update, kind of let you know where we are. We are working hard, continuing to work. Our staff is doing excellent work. I know that no matter what I'm doing for the last several months, there's always somebody working on this project. And as I walk through our office, I'll come by the conference room and I'll see them testing, I'll see them troubleshooting, and I know that we're in good hands with our staff. Since our last meeting, we have been working hard on this functionality and stabilization to get these online applications moving for licensure. One of the areas that we've been working mainly on is the finalization of the application status lookup webpage on the board's website. This is phase 4 of our project. We hope that this status lookup will launch shortly here in May of 2023. With this, applicants will be able to supply their personal information and view items that are still pending deficient with their application. So we have gotten some really good feedback from individuals, and we also know that there have been some blips, I guess, or speed bumps on our path here to success. But just want the board to know that we're working on this. I can't stress enough, how much of an impact this has had on our staff. So we are going to be relieved when we get through these next hurdles. Sharice, did you want to talk more specifically about some of the changes?
Yeah, so I think the big thing, since we finished launching all of the online applications in February, we've been working on what's called stabilization of all the applications. So troubleshooting any issues that come up, finding ways to troubleshoot when applicants create errors in their application, accidentally sign the wrong field, so on and so forth, how to work through all of these different stages, how to create workflows that can help fix production issues and stabilization. Some people might call them bugs. Sometimes it's an error on the applicant's part. Sometimes it's a weird feature of the system, and we just had to make sure we fixed it so that we could move people along. I know it did take a little while for earlier stages, but I think we have found kind of the best options now, and those are all in place, along with enhancements to make it faster on staff processing when there are things called APIs that will go ahead and fulfill things without a lot more manual processes. So the more we can reduce staff manual processes and also increase communications to applicants is the better. This system has a lot of that, but it did take a little bit of time to pin everything down and make sure it all worked the way it was supposed to, and that we have ways to help people when they're running into trouble. And then phase 4 of this project was an application status lookup, so that you could put in your social security number, well, the latter part of your social security number, and your date of birth, and it would open up all applications you've had with the board and show you which ones are open versus closed, and then what requirements you're still waiting to meet, right? So if you're an RPE light applicant, and what we're waiting on is your RPE supervisor acknowledgement, or there's a deficiency in it, when you look it up on this new web page that we'll be launching in a few weeks, you'll see, oh, there's a red deficiency there, contact the board. You would have also received an email from us saying what the deficiency is and usually a way to rectify such deficiency. But this will also be another way in which applicants can access our system to see what's going on, where am I at in the process, what's wrong with my application. So if they're not getting our email, which it can happen, you know, they applied with one email and then they started using another, they can't access the old one. We're sending emails to an email they're not answering. It can happen. So this is just one more way to have that open and more transparent application process to see what's been reviewed yet, what's been fulfilled, what's still deficient or pending. And then, of course, the system providing more frequent emails when you progress through the stages between completeness review. Did you submit a complete application? Did you meet all the requirements? Are you at final review and you just need to be issued your license? And then kind of everything in between. So small but mighty team. We've been working really, really hard, lots of extra hours. And I know that our processing timeframes have taken a hit because of that, but I really do believe that the efficiencies we're going to get from this system is going to significantly reduce a lot of the hours that staff were doing manual processing here in the office, or even just, you know, collating your application along with your transcript, along with this, along with that, and, you know, where did the paper go in the office? It's going to relieve so many other things and reduce other workload here in the office and allow us to do more. You know, if we're processing less checks, what else can some of our staff be doing? So I think we're going to start seeing the benefits of all of this really soon. I know it is hard to hear, especially when you're still waiting on your application, but we're kind of on the precipice now. And so we're excited to see this new status lookup launch, and that will be the end of the business modernization project. And then licensing will get back to all of the regular processing. And that is it. Do any board members have any questions?
Okay, it doesn't look like it. So can I ask the moderator to open for public comment on this topic?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I have opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. I'll pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 8, the legislative report, update, review, and possible action on proposed legislation. I think Charisse is going to talk to us about this with particular emphasis on Section A and Section B at this point.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Raggio. Agenda item 8 is our legislative report. In Section A, we have some of the legislative calendar and deadlines. So right now, the legislature is working on getting bills through their first House of Origin in the first year. So they've got a long way to go. It's kind of the beginning gates where everyone starts all the conversations on the bill. Later on, by the summer, they'll meet some second House deadlines and then head into a summer recess about July 15th. In Section B, for the board-sponsored legislation, we have SB 887, and it was heard on April 24th in the Senate Business Professions and Economic Development Committee, and that is an omnibus bill, so it has a bunch of non-controversial changes for different boards and bureaus in the Department of Consumer Affairs, and that includes our legislative proposal about removing gendered language from our Practice Act. So the legislative committee and staff are both recommending a support position because it's our sponsored language. And then when we move into C, section C, I'll go over each of these bills, and that way the board can hear the update, the summary, and then the recommended position from the legislative committee, and then discuss each bill as they go. So that's section C on the active position recommendations. Sorry, I'll refresh the, there we go. AB 381 by Assemblymember Rubio is on teacher credentialing for occupational and physical therapists. The bill was amended in Assembly Education Committee and wasn't scheduled for a hearing yet at the time I wrote this. The bill would amend the Education Code to allow occupational therapists and physical therapists to qualify for the health services credential issued by the Commission on Teacher Credentialing. This is something that the audiologists and speech language pathologists have the access to. The only other profession in there that would be left after they remove those two would be the audiometrist. So the board staff had concerns of whether or not, we don't have concerns of whether or not occupational therapists and physical therapists receive the credential, but with their removal, the audiometrist, I'm going to botch that word, is the only provider left there in that subsection, and we thought it would add clarity if the board requested an amendment from the author to clarify that audiometrists are registered with the Department of Healthcare Services to reduce any confusion between audiometrists and audiologists by the general public. So the legislative committee recommends to the board to take a neutral if amended position to request those amendments to clarify that the audiometrists are registered with the Department of Healthcare Services. And then if those amendments would be taken, the board would then move to a neutral position. Do any board members have any questions on this bill?
No, but you pronounce it audiometrist.
Audiometrist. Thank you. If there aren't any questions, would any board member like to recommend or make a motion to take a position of neutral if amended?
Excuse me. Actually, I do have a question. This is Holly Charisse. I'd like to know a little bit more about the use of an audiometrist versus an audiologist in the school setting. In my experience, I had worked with audiologists before. I wasn't aware in settings I was in about an audiometrist. So I'd just like to learn a little bit more about how prevalent they are.
None of the items I read talked about how prevalent they were, but that they're registered with the Department of Healthcare Services and they're used for the screening only.
I see. Okay. For screening only, because speech pathologists can do that as well. So, okay.
Yeah, well, I don't actually know how many public schools use them.
Okay. Thank you.
Audiometrists have been around for about 30 years. And in the past, they typically were nurses who worked in a school district and provided hearing screening services in a school.
I see.
There were some requirements, then I don't know if those are still the same, where they had to take a course or two courses in order to be an audiometrist. You couldn't just call yourself that.
Audiometrist, okay.
Yeah, I don't know, Charisse, if
Yes,
that's still the case.
There's still training that's required to be an audiometrist, and it could be, appointed by the school or other staff.
Well, that's helpful. It's likely that, when nurses are doing that screening and they have that training, and I just thought of them, their label as nurses. So that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, is there any other board discussion? And Charisse, the order of issues is a little different than what the document you sent me yesterday. So, did you want to call for a motion? Did you say?
I was going to do that for each bill. I'm sorry if I messed that up on our document.
We're supposed to go do A and B and then move to C?
Oh yeah, we're already in C now.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So I don't think a motion was necessary for A and B. I don't see that.
No, because it's our board sponsored legislation, so it's already a support since we sponsored it. We can take a position if you'd like.
Anybody? Okay, so let's back up a little bit so that we can ask if there's any more board discussion on A and B. And if not, we can ask the moderator to open for public comment on those two issues. Let's see, the moderator's still there.
Oh, I apologize. I thought we were waiting for board members. Let me go ahead and open up the Q&A panel. At the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. We'll go ahead and pause a moment to allow the public time to access these features and submit their requests. All right, and seeing none, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. So, Sharice already moved on to C1, which is AB 381. We had some discussion of that already. I don't know if there's any further discussion by the board on that particular legislation. So it doesn't look like there is. Can we open that panel one more time to look at public comment on AB 381?
Madam President, this is Michael Knotes. Just wanted to check in if the board's going to be making motions to take positions on these bills. It'd be advisable to do that first and then take public comment.
Okay. My notes don't say that, but Sharice, is that the goal here? Do you want to?
Yes, I apologize. It should be to request a motion to take a position.
And you're talking about AB 381?
Yes, to take a neutral if amended position. That's being recommended by the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee.
Okay. Would somebody like to move that?
So we're moving to take a support if they change the verbiage.
No, I think it's recommend neutral if amended.
Yes.
Neutral.
Holly?
If it's not too late to make a comment. So now that I'm understanding it would be neutral, I'm wondering, I understand wanting to add the language, to discuss the audiometrist, but why wouldn't we be supportive of the occupational therapist and the physical therapist? And I'm not clear on that versus neutral.
More of it's outside of our jurisdiction since we're not the occupational therapy or physical therapy board.
Okay. So it wouldn't be seen, I understand. Obviously it won't be seen as negative because it's neutral. So
yeah,
I am personally in support. So that's why I was wondering.
Got it.
Okay, do we have a motion to take a neutral position?
I motion to take a neutral position for AB 381.
Madam President, this is Michael. I think what was requested was a neutral, if amended position.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Is that the motion that you wanted to make?
Yes, I recommend
Thank
neutral if amended position for AB 381.
Thank
Like
you.
to second. This is Holly.
Okay, thank you. All right, can we ask the moderator to open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. And it appears there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. If there isn't any more board discussion, I'd like to ask Charisse to call the vote.
Yes. Dr. Raggio.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser.
Aye.
Mr. Borges.
Aye.
Ms. Chang.
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez. Ms. Dominguez.
Aye.
Okay, I can hear you now. Dr. White.
Aye.
And the motion carried.
Thank you. Okay, why don't we move to C2, SB 372. Charisse, do you want to talk to us more about that?
Absolutely. So SB 372 is on the Department of Consumer Affairs and licensees and name and gender changes. This bill would require the board to update a licensee or registrant's records, including records contained with an online license verification system like our DCA search, to include the licensee's or registrant's updated legal name or gender if the board receives government-issued documentation as described from the licensee or registrant demonstrating that the licensee or registrant's legal name or gender has changed. Some of the issues for consideration on this bill is that it would require the board to update prior disciplinary records and hide previous names for anyone that gets a legal name change, for example, marriage or divorce, rather than solely requiring this when there is a gender change that includes a name change, and thus leads to the dead naming, as the author stated in the fact sheet. So some of the issues the board might want to consider is whether or not the provisions of the bill are too broad by allowing any legal name change to trigger the provisions of the bill and removing access to prior names that the licensee had. Whether or not the board should request the author amend the bill to narrow its scope to only apply when there's a legal name change that is accompanied by a change in gender, and what processes would need to be modified in relations to our statements of issues, accusations, citations and fines, and disciplinary documents to ensure compliance with the bill while upholding consumer protections. The Legislative Ad Hoc Committee discussed it this morning and is recommending an oppose unless amended position to request the author to amend the scope to narrow it to a name change that is accompanied by a gender change, and also to ensure that any discipline that the licensee had would still be visible to the public, available online, but without the prior name, and that also that the solutions for finding out that information are administratively feasible. Some of the circulated amendments are a little more difficult, including potentially getting a separate phone line. And so just finding a more administratively feasible and more narrow bill that accomplishes the goal, but also upholds consumer protection at the same time. So again, the Legislative Ad Hoc Committee would be is requesting the board or recommending the board take an oppose unless amended position on SB 372. Do any board members have any questions? Todd?
Just out of curiosity, do we have any way of knowing if the intent of this was meant to be that broad?
The fact sheet provided in your documents, in your packet, under 8372 from the author, it does talk about that the problem is dead naming when someone intentionally or unintentionally refers to a trans or non-binary person by the name they previously used. This issue has come up when someone changes their gender and name, but the board has their prior name and I guess therefore gender. Most times we don't put Mr. or Mrs. on the website, but the name and gender are always available on the DCA search. And so this would require the board, when that name and gender change comes in, to essentially make private or hide that prior name. The only difficulty being, when I believe it's all doable with our technology systems with the DCA search. I think the issue becomes a bit more problematic if it's so broad that it means any name change, which from the fact sheet that they provided doesn't seem to be what it's going for. I can put that on the screen, sorry about that. And so that doesn't seem to be the goal, is to make it any name change. So we would hope to narrow the scope back to the goal of the author, but also to make sure that, well, I think the board wants to uphold consumer protection. So if you change your name and gender, we can accurately reflect that name change, but that your discipline follows you. So if you've been disciplined by the board, that discipline should still be viewable by the public. And that's a consumer protection measure. But that information can be redacted, the name and if there's a gender, Mr. or Mrs. or whatever in there, that also can be redacted out of those documents that are on the website and available.
What's the thinking behind the hiding of the original name?
I think it's more about the psychological harm to the person that's a transgender and non-binary person. Can't speak apparently. As well as the concern, especially for some providers, and especially mental health providers that work in, institutions such as prisons and the like, that it creates complications in their provision of services. Anyone can ask information from the board, providing the prior name it's psychologically harmful, and then it also could make issues when they're working with certain populations.
Okay. Would you mind restating the goal of this bill as you see it, or how the board staff looks at this issue one more time?
Yeah. So under the fact sheet here, the solution they're trying to make is to help protect the safety and privacy of these trans and non-binary licensees by requiring the department and us to update any online verification system or online information about licensees to have their current name and not their dead name or the name they previously had before they changed genders.
Are there other boards that are also looking at this?
Yes.
All of DCA would be looking at this. In particular, most likely, most of the people that license all of these psychological and mental health professions. But this would be for all of DCA. So yeah, every board will be looking at this.
Okay, so there's 3 considerations that I see on page 3 of 9 at the top of the page. It looks like item number 2 is probably what the board staff is leaning toward. Is that correct?
Yes.
So their name is still hidden, but past violations are visible.
Yes. And not only upon request, but they're visible plainly on the website. So if licensee number XXXX was disciplined in 2017, it still shows up on that licensee's DCA license search. It just no longer would say their prior name.
Right. This is right. This is Paul. Some of the solutions have been problematic too, because just saying we're going to keep this, but upon request, kind of creates the same problem because someone can just request it. It's just not available online. So I think we're trying to, respect the integrity of that person's new identity or name change while still providing consumer protection. That's one of the issues that we have with the bill as written now.
Okay, is there any other board discussion? Would anyone like to make a motion on the board's position on SB 372?
Just for clarity on the verbiage of the motion, we're moving to support as long as the author narrows the scope to change in gender.
We're recommending, the committee's recommending an oppose unless amended position.
Oppose unless amended. Gotcha.
Wait, correct me if I'm wrong, because I wrote on my notes it was a support unless amended. Was I wrong on that?
Yeah, I believe the committee agreed that it was going to be oppose unless amended.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's for the other bill.
Okay.
I move to take an oppose unless amended position on the bill.
Amy White will second.
Do we have to characterize the amendment in this motion, Michael?
I think that's apparent from the context.
Okay.
I think there's a good enough record that unless the board staff feels like you need more, Charisse?
I think I have adequate direction from the board.
Okay, great. All right, can we ask that the moderator open the panel for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, if there isn't any further board discussion, we have a motion and a second on the table. I'd like to call for the vote.
Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye. Aye.
Dr. White? Oops,
Aye.
Dr. White. Okay. Motion passes. The next item is SB 544, and apologies, it has the wrong name on there. It actually should be the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act label inside of your board materials. It's correct on the agenda, it's just wrong in my materials. So this bill would make the current situation with remote meetings and teleconferences permanent. So it would require each, because as Yvonne Durantes pointed out, after July 1, the temporary provisions that allow us to have remote meetings without noticing all of your locations and making sure that you're all at publicly accessible and ADA compliant locations would go back into effect. So this bill would require instead, and make it permanent, that a state body provide a means by which the public may remotely hear audio of the meeting, remotely observe the meeting, or attend the meeting by providing on the posted agenda a teleconference telephone number, an internet website, or other online platform, and a physical address for at least one site, including, if available, access equivalent to the access for a member of the state body participating remotely. So this is something the board has been using very successfully right now, and we've had increased public participation, reduced costs, and also enhanced flexibility for board members. As much as it doesn't sound like it, making sure everyone's at a publicly noticed location that's accessible to the public and ADA compliant. It actually is not always a piece of cake, depends on where everyone's at. And so this would make these changes permanent, allow greater flexibility and greater participation. So the legislative committee is recommending a support position on SB 544. Does anyone have any questions on the bill?
I have a quick question. Is this the same bill that was talked about earlier that wouldn't go into effect until January 1? Is this a different bill?
It is the same bill.
Okay, so this wouldn't go into effect till January. So we would have kind of a 4 or 5 month dead period.
Yes, the August board meeting, we will need to find you all publicly accessible locations for the teleconference. And we'll need to notice, and you'll need to post an agenda and so on at all the locations.
So basically, we're reverting back to the way we used to do those teleconference meetings.
For August.
For August, yeah.
Holly?
Would we have an option in the August meeting when it would be a teleconference to actually come in if we're not doing an overnight, kind of thing, because I understand there's costs involved with that, but will it have flexibility when for our next meeting in August?
And I would suggest in August, if you were wanting to come to the board office to participate in the teleconference, you can do that. Because it would be one of the notice locations is where the board staff would be.
Right. Okay.
I've also had it in the past where board members that are in similar locations would go to the same place. Sometimes it would be, 2 members at one other member's office. They're because it was publicly accessible and available, and so they would just put them on the conference call, and they would all join in there. So those are also options. Would anyone like to entertain the motion of support?
This is Holly. I would like to move to support. Sorry, I need to go. I'm bouncing around my computer to get the right number here. Yeah.
SB 544.
Thank you. So I move to support that the board support SB 544.
I second.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Can we open the panel for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, if there's no other board discussion, we have a motion and a second on the table.
I can call the roll if you'd like.
If you would, thank you.
Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White?
Aye.
Motion carried.
Thank you. Okay, can we move on to the C4 bill?
Yeah. SB 612 is C4, that's on speech language pathologists. This bill is a measure intended to clean up last year's bill on the fees or flexible fiber optic transnasal endoscopic procedure requirements for supervision and training. This bill would provide that licensed speech language pathologists who obtained a license before January 1, 2023 are authorized to perform the flexible fiber optic transnasal endoscopic procedure if the licensee has performed a minimum of 25 supervised flexible fiber optic transnasal endoscopic procedures and is competent to perform these procedures. So some of the issues for consideration for the board is that the current language of the bill, which was recently amended, and that stakeholders are still working on negotiating the provisions of this bill, but that it would create a grandfather clause for any speech language pathologist who obtained their license before January 1, 2023. Instead of it being based on when the written verification from a board certified otolaryngologist was obtained by the speech language pathologist. So based on the language of the current amendments to the bill, you could be licensed prior to January 1, 2023, have not gotten your written verification, but then go back and get it later on using the older provisions of the bill instead of the newer requirements for 10 supervised procedures by an otolaryngologist and then the other 15 by a speech language pathologist or a physician or surgeon who performs endoscopy as part of their practice. So the issues for consideration that are being brought up is whether or not the current grandfather clause is acceptable to the board, whether we have consumer protection concerns with the grandfather clause that's based essentially on the licensee's license issuance date, and whether or not there are the broader concerns of whether if there were no physician or surgeon supervision during the training, if grandfathering that is a consumer protection concern. Alternatively, the other question would be if the board is if the board would consider a change to when the written verification from the board certified otolaryngologist was received prior to January 1 of this year, if that version of a grandfather clause would be more acceptable. And then just so we note it, and I know there's current conversations about it, but the American Academy of Otolaryngology and the California Medical Association have concerns about there not being specified training and experience requirements for non-otolaryngologists that are allowed to supervise the 25 procedures, and whether or not whether that just diminishes consumer protections. And I believe their goal is to set some minimum standards of the number of procedures they've performed and the amount of experience and training they have so that they are fully competent and ready to be a trainer of the trainers, kind of a thing. So those are the considerations. The Legislative Ad Hoc Committee is recommending a support if amended position. They are recommending to support if amended to base the grandfather clause based on when the written verification was received by the board certified otolaryngologist, and that if it was received prior to January 1, 2023, that they would be deemed competent to perform the procedure now, or deemed to meet the current statutory requirements. Do any board members have any questions on the bill or the position recommended?
It's unfortunate that Dr. Valdez isn't at the meeting. Would like to hear his take on this at this point. Gilda, do you have any thoughts about this?
Yes. We discussed this at the committee, and exactly what Sharice was saying, that the grandfather clause, yes, it does need to be more specific and address not the time of licensure, but reflect the timing of their verification that they have been supervised and that they are deemed competent. So that's my take on that. That if they do have the documentation to support that they have been deemed competent, they've had otolaryngologists participation, supervision, guidance. So that's where my thoughts are with this.
I'm wondering if the otolaryngologist would be happy with that option. If that would
Well, if they've signed them off, they're concurring that they're competent.
Mhm. So are we really looking at alternative number 2?
Yes, Dr. Raja, I believe that it's the second issue to consider, the clarifying it to just make it narrower, the narrower grandfather clause based on the written verification receipt date.
So I just want to add, Dr. Raggio, that regardless of what is discussed in the future with discussions between the CASHA and the medical profession or otolaryngologist, this is an area that I think is of particular interest to the board, because we want to make sure that any grandfathering language be accurate, and that it not say, if you were licensed before such and such date, you have a different standard for certification. What we're saying is, if you were licensed before such and such date and you had these approvals, then you're deemed equivalent. All the technical areas that were addressed in the previous version of the law.
This is Karen. I think, Paul, you mentioned the amendment that we would want to do, right? Can you mention it? Can you let them know again what would the amendment kind of be, just in general?
Yeah, yes. I think Sharice has it in front of her. I'll let her read that.
Okay.
Yes, so the amendment we could be requesting would be that a licensed speech language pathologist who holds a written verification under this section that was issued prior to the amendments to this section in Chapter 450 of the Statutes of 2022 shall be deemed to meet the requirements of subparagraph A. So essentially, the amendments would say, if you had your written verification from the board certified otolaryngologist prior to January 1, 2023, then you would be deemed to meet the requirements in the new law.
Can I just verify something?
And that verification still needs to be on file and readily available, right, for inspection upon request?
That would still be in the law. Yes.
Okay.
So the idea of supervision by other speech pathologists, is that still on the table here? Is that still an option?
It would be under the current law, where the first 10, there's 25 required. The first 10 would need to be by a licensed physician and surgeon who performs endoscopy or an otolaryngologist, but the other 15 could be from a licensed physician and surgeon who perform nasal endoscopy, or a licensed speech language pathologist who's verified competent in performing the FEES procedure. So the current law has a first 10, subsequent 15 differentiation, and that's what the current law would be.
Okay, so we're not changing that.
No, it's leaving that in place.
Again, I wish Dr. Valdez was here. I'm curious what he would say to that. Did anybody had that conversation with him?
He would say to the law as it is written today.
Yeah, or how does he feel about the idea that you could be supervised by another SLP?
He was supportive of it last year, so.
Okay.
Hi, this is Holly. It seemed to me that in the discussion in the last meeting when he was here, he was talking about the importance of otolaryngologist. And I guess my question is, if somebody was trained before this new law came into effect solely by speech pathologists, would there be any scenarios where they would still get verification from a otolaryngologist saying they deem them as being competent, even though they didn't personally train them? Does that happen?
That was the law as it stood prior to January 1 required anyone that was performing the fees procedure to have that written verification of competence from the otolaryngologist. In discussions and things that we've found out since the passage of the bill last year is that some were getting the written verification from an otolaryngologist, but that the supervision provided during those 25 supervised procedures was not always or possibly never an otolaryngologist.
Right. Okay, that's what I understood as well. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood what the verification might actually mean if they have that written verification. It doesn't necessarily mean they were supervised by an otolaryngologist at all. Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there isn't any further board discussion, does somebody feel comfortable providing the language of the motion to accept alternative number 2?
So we are supporting if amended.
Yes.
Correct. We are supporting if amended.
Yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Yes.
Okay. I move to support if amended.
I second it.
Okay. Can we ask for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing star 3 on their device. And it looks like we do have a request for comment from Jennifer Kisner. And Jennifer, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Kisner. I'm a speech pathologist and clinical specialist in the head and neck oncology clinic at Stanford Healthcare, and I am in support of SB 612. There have been multiple fees programs that have been in practice for years and even decades, and that I've had to stop providing this service as of January 1, and our patients and consumers have had to wait longer to get their swallowing evaluations. And I just wanted to point out that there have been no adverse events or outcomes reported to the licensing board in the 20 plus years that fees has been in practice in California. So that is why I look forward to continued discussion, but I am in support of SB 612. Thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Our next individual who has requested public comment is Andrea Ball. And Andrea, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
This is Andrea Ball, a legislative advocate for the California Speech Language Hearing Association. I had to join the meeting a little late at some point, not to take up my time, but could you read or display the actual motion and amendment that you just put forward? It sounds like you had a consideration of several. That would be helpful. Kasia looks forward to continuing to work with you and your staff as this bill moves forward. We do think it's important to get clarity on this so that, as we usually expect, laws that make changes are prospective in nature, and that is clear so that those experienced speech language pathologists who have been performing fees and been licensed and had their competency verified can continue to provide this important service. As you heard from the other speaker, we really want to ensure access to this assessment. It's more and more in demand and needed. And that's what really the intent of Kasia was when we introduced the bill last year. We appreciated your support in working on us to clarify that indeed these fees can be done in a variety of medical and health settings to meet the best needs of the patients and the consumer. And so we look forward to continuing conversation, but it would be great to see the motion and the actual language that you're voting on in writing. Thank you.
Just to provide clarification, the board is recommending a support if amended to narrow the grandfather clause to be based on when the written verification was received rather than when the license was issued. And we will follow up if the board takes that position and follow up with additional information and potential language as well.
All right, this is the moderator. We'll move on to our next individual who has requested public comment, Ann Kearney. And Ann, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Hello. Hi, I hope you can hear me. I'm Ann Kearney, speech pathologist in the Department of Otolaryngology at Stanford University. I'm strongly in support of this SB 612. I just want to point out to the board that there are strict competencies that all SLPs have to go through at individual centers. I hope you keep that in mind as we move forward and try to make this wording something that we can all be happy with. Thank you.
All right, this is a moderator. It looks like I have another individual who has requested public comment, Susanna. Susanna, it looks like maybe you might be a call-in user. Can I have you press *3 on your device to raise your hand so I know which call-in user you are? There we go. Okay, I'm going to unmute you, and I believe to unmute, you're going to press *6.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Yes, I'm Susana Rodriguez. I'm an acute care speech language pathologist. I work for Adventist Health Systems as well as the community health systems. Both of these hospital systems are in rural cities or rural towns in Central California. And I'm also in strongly support of SB 612. It's especially important that we move this along so that we can continue to serve of an underserved population that has historically been underserved for quite some time. So I strongly hope that it's moved further along, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, and this is a moderator. I saw a hand go up and down from Laura Wasco. I'm not sure if she still wants to make a comment or not. If so, she can click the raise hand button. Okay, I'll take that as a no. In that case, it appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. So I don't I don't know how realistic it is to demonstrate in writing exactly the language of this the board's position on this. I don't know if Sharice, you'd like to restate it one more time, since we unless you think there is a way.
Well, we do have some suggested language, Dr. Rajo, and I think we have stated that a couple times. We can go ahead and say it again so everyone hears it. And again, the only thing we're discussing here is clarification so that the people that are grandfathered are those who met the qualifications as the law as it was written prior to the change of the law. Not everyone who was licensed before the changes of the law can now have a different standard of certification. So I'll go ahead and let Sharice read that.
Yeah, and I think, and it's always a negotiation process with stakeholders anyways, but I think this language would suffice, and that it's a licensed speech language pathologist who holds a written verification under this section that was issued prior to the amendments to this section in Chapter 450 of the statutes of 2022 shall be deemed to meet the requirements of subparagraph A. In layman speak, if you had your written verification from a board certified otolaryngologist prior to January 1, 2023, you would be deemed to meet the requirements under the current law.
Okay. So I believe we do have a motion and a second on the table. Any other discussion from board members? Seeing none, Sharice, if you could call the vote.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White?
Aye.
And the motion carried.
So Sharice, there's one more section under 8 that perhaps you thought that we wouldn't have to go into great detail with that. And then maybe take a break before we go on to item number 9.
Absolutely. Section D is for bills with a recommended watch status. So the board staff would continue to watch the bill. We would bring the bill back in August if we had concerns and thought an active position was needed at that time. The bills are in front of you in your packet. They're AB 447, AB 567, AB 883, AB 996, AB 1028, AB 1417, AB 1707, and SB 259, SB 345, SB 763, and SB 802. If any board members have any questions on any of the watch bills or would like additional information, go ahead and ask that now. Otherwise, we'll continue to watch these bills and bring them forward if we have concerns in the future.
Any board discussion on these watch status bills? Seeing now, it looks like we need a motion to maintain this watch status on these bills.
Madam President, this is Michael. I don't think you need a motion for that. It just means your staff is keeping an eye on these bills for you.
Okay. All right. Then let's open the have the moderator open for public comment.
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen, or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to call for a 10-minute break before we go on with the agenda. It is 2:45, 2:55. Agenda item 9, legislative items for future meeting.
This is the moderator. Let me click that, start the recording back up real quick, and it'll give the little message.
Okay.
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, so let's.
Madam Chair, this is Michael. We should take roll now to ensure that we still have quorum after the break.
Okay, let's do that. Sharice, would you mind?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Here.
Ms. Kaiser? Here. Mr. Borges? Ms. Chang?
Here.
Ms. Dominguez? Dr. White?
Here.
Mr. Borges? Mr. Borges, you're still on mute if you're there.
Okay, Todd, are you with us?
My
Okay, good.
earbuds decided not to work for whatever reason, so I quickly changed to a headset.
Okay, great. Okay, we've got called the roll. We have our recording going. Let's move on to agenda item 9, legislative items for future meetings. The board may discuss other items of legislation in sufficient detail to determine whether such items should be on a future board meeting agenda. So, or whether we need to hold a special meeting of the board to discuss such items pursuant to Government Code Section 11125.4. So, I think Sharice was going to manage this section.
Yes, and currently board staff do not have any additional bills to add to this list. Currently, all of the ones that we thought might potentially move or have issues are currently in our watch bills, and we do not have any others to add at this moment. If we do, we would bring it to the board chair's attention and discuss if we need to as well. But currently, we do not have any additional bills that aren't on our list at the moment.
Thank you. Do we have any board comment about that? Seeing none, can we can I ask you, moderator, to open for public comment, please?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants may raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item 10, regulatory report, update, review, and possible action on board regulation packages. I'd like to ask Ms. Lorenzo to give us that report.
Thank you, Dr. Raggio. The first item on the regulatory report is uniform standards. This has completed the regulatory process and has been in effect since April 1st. This regulation incorporated by reference DCA's uniform standards document and requires that the board use this document when disciplining substance abusing licensees. Item B is the RPE telesupervision for direct telesupervisions for direct supervision. Again, this item is completed the rulemaking process and has also been in effect since April 1st. This regulation will permit telesupervision for and establish requirements for telesupervision for RPE, for the required RPE direct supervision. The next item is item C, notice to consumers. This also completed the rulemaking process and has been in effect since April 1st. This requires licensees to provide notice that they're licensed and regulated by the board. Item D is in the final regulatory package phase and currently requires review and approval of the board. And so we do have a separate memo and materials for that discussion. Item E is the SLPA program academic requirements. This is in the DCA regulations final review, and board staff are working with DCA's regulations to finalize the required documents for the final process. This change will specify qualifications for SLPA training program directors, increase the hours of field work experience, and modify the full-time work experience for out-of-state applicants. The next item is item F, which is the hearing aid advertising requirements, and this is also this will also need review and approval of the board, and we have a memo and materials for that discussion. Item G is the continuing professional development requirements for SLPs and audiologists. This is also in need of review and approval by the board and has a memo and as well as supporting documents for the discussion. Item H is the examination requirements for hearing aid dispensers and dispensing audiologists. Board staff are still working with DCA budgets to develop the economic and fiscal impact to begin the preview process. This proposed change will update the practical exam process, describe the written exam process, update the practical exam appeal process, and specify the required hearing aid examination for dispensing audiologists will be the written examination. The next item is item I, which is regulations regarding fingerprinting. This is in the pre-review process, and the board is working with DCA budgets to develop the economic and fiscal impact statement. This proposed change will require licensees who were initially licensed prior to January 1st, 1999 to be fingerprinted as a condition of renewal. And then the last item in the report is CE requirements for hearing aid dispensers. And this is in the preparing regulatory package phase and requires review and approval of the board. We do have a memo and materials for discussion.
Okay, do you want to go back and look at those four with a little more depth?
Yes, I could take any questions on the report, any items on the report, or we can jump ahead into the first item for discussion and review.
Is there any other board discussion about Maria's report? Okay, seeing none. Do you want to go over 10D, F, G, and J?
Yes, I could start with 10D. This proposed regulations would change the SLPA supervision requirements to allow for telesupervision, for direct supervision, require a higher level of supervision for the first 90 days, require experience prior to supervising a SLPA, allow and increase the number of, allow for supervision of 3 support personnel not to exceed 6, and incorporate by reference a new supervision form as well as a notice or revise the notice to termination form. This item has been in the rulemaking process, and the board did modify the text on February 24th. From March 9th to March 24th, the board had a 15-day notice period of the modified text. Within that period, the board did receive 14 written comments. And so we do have some recommendations from those comments to the board, which is to do a second modification. And that modification would include removing duplicative information from the text, accommodate a written comment, as well as make any changes to the form so that it reflects the changes that were made in the text. I can go, so the first attachment is the public comments that were received during a 15-day period. The second attachment is the actual text. If any members have any questions on any of the information highlighted, which are the modified text, I'd be happy to answer that. If you look on page 3 of the text, you'll see that the second modification includes striking out some language that are considered duplicative, and instead it's going to reference section 1399.170.15B4. Another second modification, for the second modification, would be modifying the language on page 4 of the text, B1, to provide for a part-time equivalent. Comments, there was a comment that the board received that expressed that there isn't a part-time equivalency, so those who work part-time, they're not sure how they would be able to meet the 2 years full-time experience qualification. So that's an item the board should discuss to see how they would like to accommodate that comment. And then the final changes, you'll find it on page 6 and 7. And so it's changing the form number on page 6, top of page 6 and bottom of page 6, to the new date of the form, which is going to be now April 2023. And then on page 7, you'll see a narrative of what the board collects to terminate a supervision.
Okay, is there any board discussion about these 4 aspects?
Ask a question, make a comment. I know one of the items that was brought up a lot in the comments we received was clarification of 2 years experience in terms of whether the RPE is counted as part of that experience. So can you tell me how that is addressed in this, or is it not addressed at all? Is that part of that clarification that we need to make now?
Yes, that's correct. Currently, it does not include the RPE period as part of the practice experience. So it's two full-time years of experience after your initial licensure before you can supervise a SLPA. Yes, there has been, I did note some of the highlight in the memo, the comments that we received regarding that specific part of the provision, since it is a concern to a lot of people, saying that 2 years is too long, and with turnovers at schools, that it could negatively impact if or turnovers for SLPAs in the profession, that it can negatively impact, say, the school system if SLPs aren't able to have another SLPA because they didn't meet that 2 years requirement after having had supervised one. And then also there was one comment in particular, actually 2 comments regarding how the full-time equivalency is determined. Currently, it states that it's a minimum of 30 hours for at least 36 weeks. And so one comment expressed concerns that there isn't an equivalency for part-time. And then another comment had expressed that there's, let's see, it's at the end of page 2 in the memo, saying that those who don't work, essentially the 36 weeks is for school systems. So
Right.
Those who work 52 weeks in like the private sector, they're required to complete more hours. Essentially, they have to wait a little longer.
Right.
So there is that concern. But yes, that does need some. We do need some direction in how the board wants to address, in particular, that part-time equivalency.
Okay. Well, that's what I thought. I'd love to hear the board's comments on that. I've given it thought, and besides reading the comments, just looking and how that experience is perceived at the RPE level, and then having another full year after that. Of course, in schools that means 9 months full time. But I would like to see how others feel on the board about that. One other thing I wanted to talk about too, and that was the 20% versus one of the other comments about changing that to hours. But I think first of all, talking about how to define that 2 years and whether we should take another look at this. Any other thoughts?
So one of the comments did suggest, instead of doing the 2 years full time, for the 36, or in addition to the 30 hours per week at a minimum 36, you can also include an hours, which someone has made a calculation. If that's something the board wants to consider, again, that suggested concept is found in the board memo at the end of page 2.
Does anyone in the board have any thoughts about counting whether or not to count the RPE year towards that 2 years? I guess that's my question to others on the board. Or do you feel that these should only count after they have their permanent license? Sounds like there's no comments about that.
I don't believe, that professional experience is professional experience, I guess, until you're, I would assume it would be after licensure. In other words, I don't, pre-licensure, I don't see why we would count that. Are you saying, Holly, you think it needs to be written differently to be made more clear that's the intention?
I think it does have to be clarified some because of the comments that came in. And I am aware, of other entities that do count the RPE year. So I was thinking about that. That's why I wanted to get some more feedback about it. I can see why would be a thought of it's not, equivalent to look at somebody in private practice with the number of hours they have versus the number of hours you have in schools. I guess I'm looking at the shortage of supervisors, the teams with SLPAs in schools, and again, getting back to the consumer and with the impact, and also in the clinical settings. So I guess I just wanted to get some feedback. I feel that in many cases that I've seen, if somebody has completed the RPE and has 1 more year of experience, a lot of those folks actually have already more experience with SLPAs than some of the people that have been in the field longer. So I'm just kind of open to talking about that. That's all.
I think one consideration that staff has been continuously turned back to is that in general, we don't allow those that are required to have supervision to go supervise others.
Right. No, I don't mean while they're.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the considerations. So it's a little hard to think of an RPE should be supervising SLPAs, or that while the required professional experience is to gain it for licensure, that is also part of learning to be a supervisor and learning, being well versed enough in the practice that you are ready to supervise.
Yeah, just to clarify, I wasn't saying an RPE would be the supervisor. I was just talking about whether we count that as part of their experience towards it.
So I think if it's any simpler, Holly, you're saying instead of having to have 2 years post licensure, that only 1 year post licensure.
Yeah, that would be another way to say it. And just because we know that they've had 2 years after their master's degree. And honestly, I wanted to get some feedback if anybody else had given a lot of thought to that, if they're on the fence. I mean, I'm often on the fence about these things and just appreciate getting, hearing from others. So, and if anything, just making sure this is clear in the language that we put out there, because it did seem like it brought up a number of questions. So, anyway.
With what Amy had mentioned too, there's something said regarding experience during your RPE versus post licensure, and there is a level of clinical growth that happens post licensure that does occur. So I do think there has to be some length of time after that licensure, and I don't. 2 years doesn't seem unreasonable.
And so then what are your thoughts? I'm fine with that as well. And I hope I'm not jumping around too much. Let me know if I am. But part of the other notes that came in, there's like 2 other pieces I wanted to talk about. One was whether or not to add any flexibility to the first 90 days of the first 90 days of supervision, where right now the language is at 20% versus I think it wasn't at 72 hours, where the thinking behind that was you can provide more hours at the beginning of that 3 months. You have more flexibility to do that. Of course, we don't want that to be that somebody is just trying to make it flexible for their own schedule, convenience. But I wondered if anybody had looked at that idea and has any positive thoughts about it, negative, or whatever. Okay, so
Ms. Kaiser's referring to the comments. You can find them on page 3 of 3 in the memo. Regarding some of the comments we received regarding the first 90 days. And so that was the last comment we received regarding changing the 20% to hours. And board staff is not recommending changes to it because it's our understanding that the board wanted a higher level of supervision, like a very consistent one. And so by changing it by hours, there is a potential to complete it much quicker than what it was originally intended
okay,
for.
that I understand. Yeah, no, that does make sense. I just wondered if anybody else had any thoughts about it. Thank you. And then the last one was, we have had several comments about the 6 supervisees, even though that they would not equal more than 3 full-time. And so I've given more thought to that as well, because it seems like there's, we've had people that are not comfortable with that there could be potentially 6 people to supervise. And anyway, just want to bring that one up too. And I don't know how complicated it is to modify things at this point, but I assume this is the time to bring it up, if ever.
Yes, it is a correct. We'd have to be very detailed in what the modification is. And we do have Karen Halbo, our regulations counsel, who can help us craft some language if the board chooses to make amendments to, accommodate these comments. But yes, it has to happen today. And so that's why we're bringing it up, that to give the board the opportunity for that final amendments to this.
Yeah, so I just started to feel a little bit uncomfortable with because of some of the comments that came up, and there was a letter from ASHA saying that no other state allows that many, and so I just thought, well, maybe this is worth having a little discussion here in case that is actually too liberal and unwieldy to monitor in terms of safety for consumers. Or, maybe our board has enough controls in terms of the whole process. I know that you've aligned the forms accordingly. Did you all discuss it as when you got these comments, and did you discuss that piece as well? Those comments?
I think when we receive comments, we can't reply to them unless it's like process related. That's where we allow the board, we draft comments for you to review. But we are not recommending any changes to the number of support personnel because the board has discussed mostly the flexibility of being able to have 3 full-time SLPAs. And so we had in case there's part-time, we wanted to give the SLP the flexibility to accommodate it so that it's like an equivalent of 3 SLPAs.
Oh, I do understand that. Again, I'm just listening to the comments and making sure we, fully acknowledge them and seeing if there's any other thoughts about it. But I would certainly not say that we need to change this language. Again, it's the opportunity to talk about it one more time. So those were my areas of questions that I had. That covers everything.
So Maria, you provided suggested motions for these 4. Are those changed at this point because of this discussion?
The suggested motion, I believe, incorporates amendments because we do have to make amendments to this language because we need direction in how the board wants to be able to accommodate the part-time equivalency for section 1399.170.15B1.
Okay, so the suggested motion is still correct here?
Let me.
Page 3 of 3 or 10?
We have to determine if we want to make amendments to the language in the section that I've identified before we could do the motion.
This is Karen Halbo, but the part about allowing for part-time, Maria just put in, or the individual works XX. And so I think you would be putting in a number of this many hours in 2 years. And in the memo, she had a discussion about hours for people who are working in schools or working full-time so that it gives you a range of hours involved. Were there specific numbers that Maria, that were calculated or that could be possible to allow somebody to get the experience if they're working full-time? I mean, part-time?
Yes, if we look at the text, the proposed text on page 4, in B1, you'll see highlighted or in the individual that works. We can put, let's see, 3,120 hours. So 3,120 hours, which is equivalent to working 24 months at 30 hours per week.
So, or the individual works 2,120 hours. Is that in a calendar year, or what's the time frame? It sounded like 2 years. In 2 calendar years?
Yes, in 2 calendar years.
So that would be the specific language, or the individual works 3,120 hours in 2 calendar years. So that gives you the full-time option and the part-time option.
So does it,
so if you did that amendment, with that amendment of adding the phrase, instead of what's yellow highlighted, you would say, or the individual works 2,120 hours in 2 calendar years. With that amendment, then the language as put in the document in yellow highlighted incorporates the changes described in the memo. So the other language is fine. This was the one amendment we needed to have direct board input to do.
I also want to correct myself. So the 3,120 hours, that's working 30 hours per week on a 52 weeks or 52 weeks or a calendar year.
Oh, okay. So 1 calendar year.
Well, it'd be it's an equivalent of 2 calendar years.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's 30 hours for 52 times 50, plus 104 weeks. So that's what the hours are.
So then the language is still correct, though, 3,120 hours in 2 calendar years?
The calendar years would not be needed because a part-time person can probably work, I think, a little longer or something like that.
Okay, so that there is a full-time experience for at least 36 weeks in a calendar year, or 3,120 hours, but without limitation of the time?
Yes.
okay, so where are we here with the emotion?
Okay. So again, it's you would do a motion with the amendment to subdivision to section 1399170.15 subdivision B, paragraph 1, replacing the term or the individual works XX to be or the individual works 3,120 hours, period. Because the earlier part of the sentence does say 2 years of experience. So you don't need to put a time frame on it. You're saying it's this way or this way. And by having an hours total, that allows for a part-timer to be able to reach what's required. And otherwise, the rest of the language is as it is in the board packet.
Is there any other board discussion about that?
Yeah, I think this is Gilda. I'm just trying to understand. So it's basically like whichever one comes first. That's what I'm understanding. So that those hours can be met short of 2 years if they work more hours.
No, if they work, well, yeah, I mean, they'd be working more than 30 hours per week.
So whatever comes first. So say they work 40 hours a week, that time frame would be shortened.
In weeks, but not in hours, yes.
In weeks. Okay. Okay. Okay, understood.
Would anybody like to make a motion as amended?
I would like to make a motion as amended. Do you need me to read more verbiage regarding that?
Maybe it would be helpful.
There's a suggested language on page 3 of the memo.
Would you like me to read it?
Yes.
Okay.
Move to approve the proposed second modified regulatory text as amended for 16 CCR section 1399.170, 1399.170.2, and 1399.170.15 through 1399.170.18, and direct staff to take all steps necessary to notice the second modified regulatory text. If no adverse comments are received during the 15-day comment period, authorize the executive officer to take any non-substantive changes to the regulatory package and take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking and adopt the proposed regulations as amended.
Do you want to add to that, Holly?
I move to everything that she just said. Let's try to say that.
Ms. Kaiser, you can just say so moved, and that's plenty.
I so move.
Do we have a second? Okay, can we open up for public comment, please?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And it looks like we do have a request for public comment from Megan McCann. And Megan, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device. Oh, looks like you may have muted yourself. I'll click request to unmute. Okay,
Hi,
now you're
can you hear me?
unmuted. Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, I'm sorry. All right, so unfortunately, I'm the one that did the math on the hours. Thank you guys for listening to all my numbers. The only thing I have a question with in the hours before supervision is you guys were talking about for a second about there maybe being a 1-year post-licensure opportunity, and if that was possible, then those hours would just be half of what you would acquire in a 2-year period if you were in the school district. I honestly am concerned with the 2-year post-licensure, not because more experience isn't better, but because I think we have such a shortage in SLPs who can supervise. I think over time, we might be cutting off the possibility of our SLPAs having long and fruitful careers because we're going to have less and less supervisors as years come by. My other comment really quickly is on the 20% of supervision for the first 90 days. I understand that we need those hours there. I actually am the one that wrote in the comment about having some flexibility in that. We supervise our SLPAs a lot in the first month, and then we start kind of filtering off a little bit. We're still at like 4 and 5 hours a week at, towards the end of their 3 months. But in all reality, to accommodate the 72 hours, how you guys have it written with the 20 hours per week, I am going to encourage all of my supervisors to supervise less in the first few weeks and more later on. And I just don't know if that's actually beneficial for an SLPA. But as a private practice owner, it's what I'm going to have to do, because we just can't pay for endless hours of supervision, if that makes sense. So I was the one that kind of was suggesting maybe that 72-hour thing. Like I said, I can see the concern with, you could have somebody just blaze through it in their first 2 weeks, but, and you guys are looking for consistency over time, but I just feel like the 72 being so stringent with 8 hours a week is, like I said, in my practice, is going to cut their supervision down a lot. They're getting like twice that in the first few weeks, and then we start filtering down over time. So that's just kind of my concern with that, is not having that flexibility. And then one last thing, I do have a question. Somebody said something, and I'm not sure if it was an error or not, but are there going to be an opportunity to supervise 3 SLPAs, or is it still, because right now it's 2 SLPAs and 1 aide.
30 seconds.
So my question is this, is that going to be 3 SLPAs, or is it 2 SLPAs and 1 aide? That's it. Sorry. I hope I got everything in.
This is Maria. Hi, Megan. It would be to allow for 3 SLPA. That was the removing that 2 SLPA restriction was the intent of the amendments.
Okay, thank you.
All right, this is the moderator. Our next individual has requested public comment, Marette. And Marette, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
I just wanted to add, kind of on the following off the last comment and what Holly was saying, that 20% supervision. Sorry, this is different from what Holly was saying, but the requirement of 20% supervision at the beginning, I agree, seems possibly heavy-handed. And I just want to note on that point that ASHA previously had requirements of similar front-loading that they've since moved away from. So just wanting to note that putting this into regs in California would actually be a stepping away from our national certifying body as SLPs.
All right, this is the moderator. It appears that was our last request for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, this is getting very dense, and I want to make sure that our motion is still as stated. Gilda?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment. There's been discussion of the aspect of the supervisor's concern regarding the 20%, but I think it's also important to look at the SLPA, or the support staff on maybe they want that guidance on the front end, and we're assuming that might not be the case. I think, when someone's new into the field or their profession, at least what I've heard out there is that they want that guidance. They're hungry for the information, they're hungry for the training, and they're eager to learn and be mentored. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we need to look at it in their eyes as well, and not just as supervisors.
Is there other? Can we go back to public comment? Excuse me.
Madam Chair, this is Michael. At this point, if there's no further board comment, we should be calling for a vote at this point.
Okay. All right. Is there any other board comment? Okay, so we are, we have the motion on the table as stated and as amended. Any other board comment about this motion? Seeing none, Charisse, can you call the vote?
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser? Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang? Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White? Motion carried.
Okay, there are suggested language for motions for the other three items. Do you want to discuss those further, Maria?
Yes, we do want to get some guidance from the board on some areas that came up while I was preparing the documents for the regulatory process. The next item is 10F regarding hearing aid dispensing advertising. This is a previously adopted proposed language that we are preparing for the process. Last year, the hearing aid dispensing committee reviewed the language. And that is what we're presenting today, as well as any changes that was made for the purpose of moving along the process. We do have two questions regarding the language. And so the first one is, regarding what addresses should be advertised, if any. And then the second one is regarding the advertising related to research and study. And so we're looking on page 3 of the text. And so we did, we were thinking for this address, we weren't sure if every, let me see, what was it? There's two different requirements regarding addresses that are displayed to the public. For hearing aid dispensers, we displayed addresses for all their businesses. And then I think dispensers, because they're audiologists, I believe it's only their primary place of practice. But we just had questions if in advertising, should there any be an address and what that address should be.
You want to go to the next one, then and talk about it.
And then the next one is on the final page regarding the research. And we wanted to know if the sale of hearing aids should also be before and after, or before and during the research. As currently written, it says after. So we're suggesting language in connection with or in relation to.
I guess I need to understand for this last part about research. What's the point of this? Where did it arise from?
This was a board, so this was before my time, so I'm not too familiar with how this came, but in the previously adopted language, it had this as a prohibitive, like, I'm not sure why research for sales of hearing aid not resulting as a result of the research. I'm not too familiar if research and sale of hearing aid is a common practices. That is for discussion amongst amongst you to see if that's even, I mean, we could remove it if it's not like a common practice, but that was language that was previously adopted.
And this is in response to the advertisements that used to go out that said, would you like to be part of this research or study? Or we're looking for, a certain number of individuals to come and test these hearing aids for us. And it was just basically an effort to do outreach and sell to people. There was no study.
Wanted 30 ads, wanted 30 people.
Right.
So I don't think we want to get rid of it. Because we don't want that kind of strategy.
Yeah, our suggested change was maybe to replace following with the phrase in connection with and in relation to. That way it also includes the selling prior to or during the research, because as currently written, it says following the research.
Okay, say that again.
To replace following with in connection with or in relation to.
So that way it would read an offer for authorized services as part of a research and or field study does not violate this section if no selling of hearing aids occurs in connection with the research or study. Essentially, by saying the words following, it allowed anything that happens during or prior. So we just want to make sure it's anything in connection with that research or study.
Or in relation to.
In relation to. Either way would work, in relation to or in connection with.
It closes the loophole, basically.
Exactly.
So there is a suggested motion language on page 2 of 2 of the memo. Would that be altered at all?
It would be altered to say as amended at the end.
Okay. Would anybody like to make this motion?
I would like to also clarify in the address. Currently, what we have presented is that the address, it's not going to be all the addresses. It's just going to be the principal place of business that is available for fitting and post-fitting adjustments and servicings. Because that's,
as written there.
As written there, it does come off with the impression like there are multiple addresses, and there can be. And so just to align the address requirement to what's required for written receipts would probably be more clear to what's being required here. And so that's also the amendments we're proposing in this language.
Okay, so they're only going to be listing their principal location.
Yes.
Right, and not the rest. Todd, do you have any thoughts about that?
No, I think that's appropriate. I mean, otherwise you could end up a half-page ad of nothing but addresses.
Yeah.
So if you'd like, I can go ahead and read a proposed motion.
Okay.
Move to approve the proposed regulatory text as amended for section 1399.127. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business, Consumer Services, and Housing Agency for review, and authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking, including any non-substantive changes to the package, and adopt the proposed regulations at section 1399.127 as amended.
So move.
Second.
Can we open for public comment?
At the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, if there isn't any further board discussion, can you call the vote, Truth?
Yes. Dr. Raggio.
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser? Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang? Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White? Motion carries.
Okay, we have a couple more. 10F. Maria, do you want to talk to us more about that in detail?
Yes, we're actually on 10G, which is the continuing professional development for SLPs and audiologists. And so this one is I'm getting ready to move this forward into the initial review process. And so I have made some changes to get it going. But I do have some clarifying. I do need some guidance from the board on how to address these issues that I've identified, if we want to identify it now. The first item for discussion is regarding CPD requirements for expired license. Currently, we actually don't have a requirement for SLPs and audiologists. We do have something for hearing aid dispensers. And so we're suggesting language that's in there, which is any person whose license has expired for 2 renewal cycles or more shall complete the required hours of continuing professional development for the either the most recent renewal cycle or the prior 2 renewal cycles before such license may be restored. And so we do want to get the board members' opinion regarding how much CPD must be completed if the license has been expired for more than 2 renewal cycles.
Currently, the hearing aid dispensers, if they've been expired for 2 years, which is 2 renewal cycles, they have to make up the CE for both of those 2 renewal cycles.
Are we going to mirror that with the audiologists?
And speech language pathologists, yes.
Yes, that's correct. 2 renewal cycles for this side of for these license type are actually 4 years because they're biannual. It's a biannual. For speech language pathologists and audiologists, they renew biannually.
So essentially, do we want to mirror it, or do we want to say it's just the most recent renewal cycle, which would also trigger the question to make the change for the CE requirements for hearing aid dispensers to match so that it's equivalent on both sides?
Are the number of CEUs required the same?
No, well,
yes, but the renewal cycles are different. So we're trying to make it equivalent per renewal cycle, essentially.
So the total number is not the same.
Exactly. So dispensing audiologists and hearing aid dispensers would need to make up 12 units or 12 hours and 12 hours for those 2 renewal cycles that they were expired for. And then if you're on the speech side, you would be a speech language pathologist. If you were expired for 2 renewal cycles, that'd be you were expired for 3 to 4 years. And you would need to make up the 24 and 24, which again is 12 per year. So, right, am I right?
So if we match, it's 48 to 24. But if we go back and say only 1, so it's 24, then we'd have to go back and change the dispensers and theirs would basically be 12 instead of 24.
Yes.
So that there was parity.
Yes.
And some other boards do have the more lenient cycle or standard of just make up the most recent renewal cycle and carry on. So get up to par and then move on.
Yes, because if we make this similar to what is currently required for hearing aid dispensers, we are talking about like 48 hours that they have to complete before we can reissue them their license. And we're not sure. I mean, I don't know how realistic that could be, but that's up for the board to decide.
Well, that becomes punitive then, because we're asking them to complete twice the number of hours that they're actually required to complete.
And that may be why the board wants to go with the language of most recent renewal cycle and then mirror it for the hearing aid dispensers, which is just come clean to what you would have had to do to renew had you done it in a timely manner and you weren't expired for the last year or the last 2 years.
So just to clarify, in that case, then a dispensing audiologist would only need to make up 12 hours, but a non-dispensing audiologist would need to make up 24 hours. Because the non-dispensing audiologist is on a 2-year renewal cycle and a dispensing is on a single?
Yes. But they would have been expired for longer as the audiologist.
In that case, if I was that audiologist, I think I'd sell one set of hearing aids a year. That's interesting. Well, it seems to me, I don't know how much as the lesser of two evils, I would probably then prefer just complete the most recent cycle. Because the non-dispensing audiologists are going to be left holding the bag considerably, otherwise. And I don't know how fair that is necessarily.
I agree with Todd.
Okay, so we'll go with, for that first one, we'll do the most recent renewal cycle. We do have a second question. So in the past, the board has awarded 2 hours for participating in occupational analysis. Should this be codified in regulations? And if so, we do have suggested language. And that's, I found this while I was doing research on how implementing this regulation and found this, I noticed in the reports that this is in there. So if it's something the board wished to continue, we could codify it in either section 1399.160.1 or 1399.160.3. And it would probably fall maybe better at the latter, which is 1399.160.3, where we go into descriptions of each of the different type of CPD requirements, like self-study and indirect and other such items.
Occupational analysis, what does that fall under? Which category?
It would be its own category,
it's currently considered in most CPD circles as a professional development related activity. So it's kind of like participating in administering or developing the board's hearing aid dispensing exam if you're on the other side. And the occupational analysis is a very long survey. It can take up to 2 hours to complete, actually, depending on the length of the survey. And it's used to help with the validation of our examinations, including the praxis that the department has to verify that it meets our current laws and that it also tests the knowledge that's necessary to enter the professions. And so they do a speech language pathology occupational analysis and an audiology occupational analysis periodically every about 5 to 7 years in order to validate the praxis exam for both of those, and they work with ETS on doing that. The survey is done of all of the licensees, and it is a pretty long survey. I've helped with the wordsmithing one before. It's long and it can take a while to answer all the questions. So providing those CE hours is a helpful item for most.
And I think that sounds like a good opportunity as well for them to gain experience in this and learn.
So it looks as though the
Yeah, I have a question about that too, the occupational analysis. You said it would be its own category. So when we look at self-study versus, that 50% you can do a self-study, would it be under that category or would it not?
No, so it would be against the hours. So say if you're required to do 24 hours and that year you happen to do the occupational analysis survey. So you have 22 hours to complete in whatever the CPD requirements. And that's where you would apply the other parts.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you.
So in looking at the motion, in suggested motion, it's really doesn't have many specifics in it that you've been talking about.
The motion would just, we would change as noticed to as amended, and we would make the amendments as we discussed, which is for number 1, the most recent renewal cycle, and to add to 13, for the second one, to add to 1399.160.3, this language that we have here, which is the 2 hours for a complete and occupational analysis.
Okay, Holly. Holly.
I could read the motion language if that's what you're looking for, if there aren't any more board discussion.
Well, Holly has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I just had forgotten to take it down from last time.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Maria, would you like to read that for us?
Yes. Move to approve the proposed regulatory text for 16 CCR sections 1399.160 through 1399.160.4. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. Authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking, including any non-substantive changes to the package, and adopt the proposed regulations at 16 CCR sections 1399.160 through 1399.160.4 as amended.
Second.
Okay, can we open for public comment?
At the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and seeing no requests for public comment, would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you.
We do have a public comment that was emailed to us that I can read. The public comment was from Jeff. Jeff states that currently CEUs include a statement with the 24 hours, a maximum of 6 hours may be in self-study. I ask that be changed to read a maximum of 12 hours, maybe in self-study, or that it be changed to read a maximum of 18 hours. I feel the current regulations places an enormous burden on speech language pathologists to attempt to find many live webinars, which are becoming increasingly difficult to find. In addition, many find recorded webinars cannot be taken for credit due to this requirement. SLPs need to be better equipped in collaboration with other professionals, understanding the nature of, oh, my apologies. So there was also suggested changes to the indirect or related courses to be increased from 4 to increase from what it currently is, which is 4 to 8 hours. And the comment, again, from Jeff says that SLP needs to be better equipped in collaboration with other professions, understanding the nature of disorders they address, how to take data and track progress, how to organize an intervention schedule, understanding how to properly complete IEPs, including the use of online IEPs systems, and much more. The current 4-hour maximum is unnecessary limitations for ECUs and need to be changed to allow credit for broader skill acquisitions within the parameters of this profession. And that was the end of Jeff's comment.
Is there any further board discussion? Okay. Seeing none. And we have already had our public comment. So I would like Sharice to call the vote.
Absolutely. Dr. Raggio?
Aye.
Ms. Kaiser? Mr. Borges?
Aye.
Ms. Chang? Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White? Motion carries.
It looks like we have one more, issue 10J.
Yes, so 10J is continuing education requirements for hearing aid dispensers. The hearing aid dispensers committee have been looking at increasing the number of hours for certain courses. And so we are getting ready to move this along in the process, but we do have the similar questions that we had for SLPs and audiologists. And if the first question again is regarding expired license. Does the board wish to amend the language that's currently written? And if we could align it to what was just approved for the last language. And so in that, on page 1, we would be replacing years with renewal cycles. So it'd be a license that's expired for 2 renewal cycles, which is an equivalent of 2 years. They would have to complete the most recent renewal CE requirements for the most recent renewal cycle, which is 12 hours. And then the second option, the second question again is regarding the occupational analysis. We can also add to the hearing aid dispensers that a licensee can also have their CPD or CE hours completed, 2 hours of CEs if they complete the occupational analysis survey.
Said that, no? I mean, I guess I might have just read it on the other one.
The other one was for practices of speech language pathology and audiology, and this is for the hearing aid dispensers.
Right, and I'm getting them kind of blended in together.
So we're going to be moving both packages forward, and so since they had similar changes, we're asking similar questions.
Is there any reason not to make them equivalent?
Yes, we can make them equivalent. We don't have to change it. We'll just note that we'll be including in section 1399.140, that the occupational analysis, the 2 hours, and then we'll be amending 1399.140E to align with the language that we have in the memo for the most recent renewal cycle.
Yeah, I don't see any reason not to make them equivalent. I think is
Exactly.
what you're asking is, is there a reason to maybe not do it at all? But I would agree that it makes sense to make them equivalent.
If there aren't any more board discussion, I can read the motion language.
Okay.
Motion move to approve the proposed regulatory text for 16 CCR sections 1399.140, 1399.140.1, and it should say 1399.144. Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. Authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to initiate the rulemaking process, make any non-substantive changes to the package, and set the matter for a hearing if requested. If no adverse comments are received during the 45-day comment period and no hearing is requested, authorize the executive officer to take all steps necessary to complete the rulemaking, including any non-substantive changes to the package, and adopt the proposed regulations at 16 CCR sections 1399.140, 1399.140.1, and 1399.144 as amended.
Would anyone like to move?
So move.
Second, this is Holly.
Can we ask for public comment?
Moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And audio-only participants can raise their hand by pressing *3 on their device. All right, and it appears there are no requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. All right, if we don't have any further board discussion, Sharice, can you call the vote?
Absolutely, Dr. Raggio. Ms. Kaiser?
Aye.
Mr. Borges? Ms. Chang?
Aye.
Ms. Dominguez?
Aye.
Dr. White? Dr. Raggio? Motion carries.
Okay, thank you, Maria, for all that hard work.
You're welcome.
We can move on to agenda item 11, future agenda items. Are there any items that the board members would like to see as future agenda items? Okay, seeing none, can we open for public comment?
This is the moderator, and at the direction of the board, I've opened up the Q&A feature for public comment. Members of the public, if you would like to make a comment on this item, please click the Q&A icon located at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen or use the raise hand function. And it does look like we have a request from Marette. And Marette, you'll be given 3 minutes to speak and a 30-second warning. Please click the unmute me button when the prompt appears on your device.
Know if this would necessarily be a future agenda item, but back to item 10B on the new RPE supervision regulatory language. I had added in the Q&A maybe just a point out that there may be need for clarification on this consideration for RPE supervisors, that they need to inform the patient about use of telesupervision, if that is strictly for medical settings, or if possibly that language might need to be clarified to include client. I do think that there are some significant feasibilities of implementing that in a school-based setting.
All right, this is the moderator. It appears there are no further requests for public comment. Would you like me to close that Q&A panel?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so at this point, we are going to go into closed session to discuss disciplinary matters. So we're going to, the meeting will adjourn upon the end of the closed session, so it will not reopen to the public. And I'd like to ask the moderator to make the room private for the purposes of closed session.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.